Chapter 976 Compound X. You are already dead, Zhang Yi said to Baldia. Zhang Yi had some respect for this hunter. Because the other party, like him, was a shrewd and patient hunter. Even in terms of hunting alone, his abilities were stronger than Zhang Yi's. However, at the moment, no one on the entire Star Island could break Zhang Yi's absolute defense unless a mutant of Epsilon level stepped down. Appreciation aside, he still had to be killed. Bardia's eyes stared at Zhang Yi like a poisonous snake. He had already understood that he had fallen into Zhang Yi's trap. After being attacked up close, the greatest advantage of a top-notch hunter had vanished. So the next battle was bound to be a tough one. Bardia immediately opened up a communication with the command center so that he could transmit real-time images back. Even if he were to be defeated, he could still provide headquarters with information about the person in front of him. On the command center side, when Horn and the others saw Bardia's real-time communication, they all gathered around. What's wrong with Euler? He has an enemy in front of him. This guy should be the chaos in the Jiangnan region. Everyone stared at the 3D projection in front of them, and they realized that Bardia was in a tough battle. But for now, there was nothing they could do to help. Because on the Star Island in an unknown direction, anyone in danger could almost only rely on themselves. Even if there were mutants around, it was not easy to rush over to provide support in a directionless area. On the contrary, it was easy to be hunted by other enemies in the shadows due to the chaos. Horn said in a low voice, Euler is the strongest hunter of the Hell Lock. He can definitely hunt chaos. I think this active real-time communication is just to brag about his battle record to us. Lieutenant Colonel Crudy agreed, you're right. Lieutenant Colonel Euler has never failed in a mission. Chaos will become a brand new gold star on his Medal of Merit. While the two were talking, the battle on the battlefield had already begun. Zhang Yi didn't waste any words. He knew that close combat would disable the opponent's most important ability. However, it was unclear how strong the opponent's close combat capabilities were. Therefore, he planned to first use mid to long-range attacks to test the waters. Thunderstrike was put away, and two white eagles appeared in Zhang Yi's hands. The large silver-gray pistol was modeled after a sawed-off shotgun and had tremendous power, but the recoil was also enormous. However, Zhang Yi could completely use the power of space to eliminate the impact of the recoil. The huge muzzle was aimed at Baldia. No need to aim, just raise the gun and shoot. Baldia quickly drew his longbow, the silver radiance intensified, and an arrow shower exploded from the compound bow. For close-range combat, my bow is no slouch. It's better to say that it's even stronger. Bardia quickly came back from the shock of being discovered in the ambush point, quickly began to analyze the battle situation, and gave full play to his own advantages. He was the god of hunting, and although he had always used a bow and arrow instead of firearms, he had always been criticized for being retro. But those people simply did not know that for powerful mutants, the mechanical properties of firearms could sometimes become a hindrance. The bow and arrow, which relies more on human power, can achieve the most rapid burst of strength. The sound of the gun in Zhang Yi's hands continued, and soon the 2 magazines of bullets were shot. However, the speed of the Baldiara bow did not slow down at all, and the hand pulling the bow appeared to have afterimages. Zhang Yi's brows slightly furrowed, and he also discovered the problem. However, this also could not affect him. Even for short to medium distances, is the bow and arrow still the main method of combat? He needed to reload his pistol, which was indeed a drawback. But the advantage was that it consumed very little of his supernatural power. Unlike Baldia, who constantly consumed his own supernatural power to condense arrows. What's more, although Baldia could attack non-stop, his attacks could not break Zhang Yi's 2 realms junction defense. Zhang Yi directly sheathed the white eagle in his right hand, and Holy Judgment appeared in his hand. So, I wonder how good you are in close combat. Zhang Yi swung his right hand, and the rich power of the void enveloped the entire blade, which then turned into a huge blade of light that slashed towards Baldia. Baldia had to interrupt his attack, quickly jumping in the air and dodging the attack. However, the black, flame-like dark substance did not stop. It became soft in Zhang Yi's hands. It became soft in Zhang Yi's hands, like flowing water, like a long snake, winding and coiling as it launched another attack on Bardia. Bardia continued to flee, but no matter how fast he was, he could never outrun Zhang Yi, who could teleport within a 1-kilometer radius. At this point, this area had already become Zhang Yi's home turf. Whether to fight or to flee was entirely up to Zhang Yi. Bardia had no right to refuse a fight. What can you possibly do to resist this kind of attack? Bardia looked up at Zhang Yi as he dodged his attacks. His brows were knitted together in a frown, as he could see that the situation was not going his way. And there was only one reason for this: his attacks were completely ineffective against Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi's attacks, on the other hand, could kill him. In a sense, the two were fighting using space. The only difference was that Zhang Yi's space did not exist in this world. Bardia's space, on the other hand, is in the present world. He must stretch out physical space to ensure his absolute advantage and safety. When this advantage disappeared, he was as awkward as Zhang Yi, who was unable to open the dimensional gate. Facing the void black flame's pursuit, Bardia had to reach out and draw his bow, quickly forming a more powerful supernatural arrow. Then he aimed at the void black flame, which was chasing like a viper, and shot it fiercely. A dazzling silver radiance exploded out as the bowstring was released. The moment it touched the void black flame, the radiance that flashed directly rendered the surrounding sky into two distinct colors of light and darkness. Zhang Yi's expression did not waver in the slightest, but instead he continued to attack with the power of the void. Bardia tried to draw away. However, all of these approaches were in vain. In the current situation, one of them, him or Zhang Yi, must die before the battle could possibly end. Horn's voice came through the communicator and into Bardia's ears. His dimensional space defense is not unlimited. You must use coercive measures to break through, and then you have a chance to kill him. Bardia's eyes darkened. I know. He gave the combat suit an order: inject Agent X. Receiving instructions. Drug hatch opening. Injecting Agent X. Inside the combat suit, a secret compartment located at the heart position opened, and a needle was extended, which was then directly injected into Bardia's heart. Chapter 977, You want to play with your life, do you? Zhang Yi looked down on Bardia condescendingly. Today, he must kill this troublesome opponent. Otherwise, his plan for Star Island will be greatly hindered. But when he met Bardia's dark eyes, a sense of heaviness arose in his heart. Bardia's eyes were the eyes of a man who was ready to die. The X compound was injected directly into the heart, and after this powerful blood pump, it quickly circulated throughout the body, and the effects of the drug quickly took effect. Bardia's breath instantly changed. Zhang Yi keenly noticed that he had become even more dangerous, as if a beast had awakened. Bardia's eyes turned bloodshot, and his skin quickly flushed a terrifying red. Hi! Zhang Yi instantly realized this. He couldn't help but feel in his heart that the other party was indeed worthy of being a top Columbia soldier, and was able to realize in the shortest amount of time that the situation was not in his favor. If this continued, Bardia would definitely welcome the exhaustion of his supernatural abilities, and then be killed by Zhang Yi. Instead, he should take advantage of the fact that he was still in full bloom and inject himself with drugs to fight for his life. However, even if he wanted to risk his life, Zhang Yi would not inject Compound 5 to fight against him. That would be pointless. Chaos, come! The aura around Bardia surged out violently, and at this moment, his power was strengthened to an unprecedented level. It even had a hint of an Epsilon-class aura. Now, he felt like he could pierce the sky with a single arrow. Even this mutant in front of him, who had absolute defense, he could kill. But just as he raised his compound bow and was about to play for his life with Zhang Yi, goodbye. Zhang Yi left these words behind and, without hesitation, turned his head and walked away. After taking the drug, Bardia would temporarily explode with amazing combat effectiveness, but the duration of the drug would not be very long. Even though the drug technology in Colombia is different from that of the Huashu Kingdom, this kind of drug that suppresses potential will definitely bring about great weakness in the near future. Instead of coming over to fight him to the death at this time, it is better to slip away first and then wait for the opportunity to come and reap the weakened head of Bardia. Zhang Yi carried this very clearly. Bardia was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect this guy to be so despicable. Don't you even have a shred of courage as a warrior? Pa! Bardia cursed viciously. But Zhang Yi didn't even care. What warrior's courage? He wasn't a soldier, so what did that have to do with him? After he killed Bardia, he would report back to the command center, so he would be the one to decide what story to tell. In an instant, Zhang Yi had already arrived 1,000 meters away. Bardia instantly completed the process of drawing a bow and knocking an arrow. This time, his arrow turned blood red, and the enchanting arrow carried a magical shock. Whoosh! Bardia let go of his hand, and all that could be seen was a red flash of light that instantly pierced the void and chased after Zhang Yi's back. Zhang Yi had no time to perform another space shuffle, and had to turn his hand around to open the dimensional gate. Whoosh! The red arrow disappeared into Zhang Yi's dimensional space without a sound. However, Zhang Yi quickly opened the dimensional gate again. Because Bald's arrow could track him, it could not be placed in dimensional space. Otherwise, when Bald attacked a second time, he would be in a dilemma. The red arrow quickly flew out of dimensional space and headed straight for Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi picked up the long sword in his hand and slashed down fiercely. Boom! A red flash of blood and a black flash of light shot up into the sky, triggering a violent explosion. The two forces cancelled each other out, and Zhang Yi retreated hundreds of meters to avoid the secondary damage of the explosion. Bardia's eyes were gloomy. Can't even hurt you like this? Is this the ability of Jiangnan's top combat power absolute defense? But this time, he was clearly in the upper hand, because his ability made Zhang Yi start to feel a bit flustered. Bardia crouched low, and a bloody mist slowly began to spread around his body. Then the bloody mist quickly solidified, turning into hundreds of giant bloody wolves. Bardia's longbow in his hand aimed at Zhang Yi, which also put Zhang Yi under considerable pressure. The space shuffle would have a short interval of less than a second between the two times. But for a top-level sniper, this interval could be completely grasped. During this interval, Zhang Yi was extremely vulnerable and could easily be hit directly. At this level, the protective power of combat clothing cannot be ignored, but it definitely could not prevent a fatal injury. As a result, Zhang Yi was forced to remain in place and was unable to use the space shuffle to escape. Hundreds of blood-red giant wolves sped towards Zhang Yi and quickly surrounded him in the center. However, at this moment, Zhang Yi's helper, Flower, also arrived. It rushed like a tank, directly knocking a few of the blood-colored giant wolves away, before blocking in front of Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi glanced at it, but just calmly said, "You go deal with the wolves. I'll take care of that guy. No need to risk your life, he's high on drugs, just stall him, he'll lose for sure." Time was not on Bardia's side. Bardia sneered inwardly. The effect of the X compound could last for half an hour, and it was the most advanced medicine in Colombia. Zhang Yi's words meant that he believed he could last for half an hour. Bardia of course felt that Zhang Yi was too arrogant. With one hand, he drew his bow and once again condensed the bloody arrows that carried the scent of death. But this time, there were 3 arrows. Zhang Yi's pupils constricted. Bardia had 2 ways of attacking with arrows: the split arrow, which was a test attack like the one before, and the deadly arrow, which concentrated great power. Now, Bardia was obviously using the latter. "Your dimensional space can only stop one of my arrows, so what are you going to do about the other 2? Bardia said, and the 3 arrows in his hand shot out with a whoosh. The 3 arrows were shot in 3 different directions: left, center, and right. However, they were all heading in the same direction, and after locking onto Zhang Yi, they would continue to chase after him until they destroyed him. "I'm starting to like you a little," Zhang Yi said. A white light began to appear in his right eye, and the light began to distort. With a burst of divine power, he directly shattered the red arrow in front of him. With his right hand, he used holy judgment to shatter an arrow, and with his left hand, he opened the dimensional gate to trap another arrow. But at this moment, Baldia suddenly made a move that Zhang Yi had not expected. He stuck his longbow in the ground, a sharp dagger appeared in his left hand, and then he charged towards Zhang Yi. Chapter 978, The 12-Fold Mirror World. Among the military, marksman is a great honor that can only be obtained by those with the most exquisite marksmanship. But that doesn't mean that snipers are only good at long-range attacks. An excellent sniper often needs to have strong comprehensive combat capabilities. And the ability to fight close quarters is something that a Navy SEAL like Bardia is proficient in to the bone. A cruel smile appeared at the corner of Bardia's mouth. From the few movements Zhang Yi made with his sword, he could tell that although Zhang Yi had received professional training, he was not skilled. Therefore, Zhang Yi was not a powerful mutant in close combat. At least, compared to him as a Navy SEAL, he was far from it. Therefore, close combat had instead become Bardia's forte. The 3 arrows temporarily sealed Zhang Yi's ability to use the dimensional space, while also distracting him. He was certain that Zhang Yi would never have expected him to use this move. In an instant, Baldia had arrived in front of Zhang Yi. He placed his left hand on his chest and swung his strong, powerful arm quickly towards Zhang Yi's neck. The red supernatural power wrapped around the dagger, making this already extremely dangerous weapon look even more terrifying. Zhang Yi's eyes flashed with a look of surprise. But soon, it turned into mockery and ridicule. Who said that my dimensional gate can only be opened in front of me? From a distance of thousands of meters, the red arrow that had been absorbed into the dimensional space suddenly flew out, then turned in an extreme direction and once again attacked Zhang Yi. But this short period of time was already fatal for a master. And Zhang Yi opened another door in front of him. It was too late for Baldia to realize something was wrong. His arm had already plunged into dimensional space with the speed of light. His pupils constricted, and he understood that once he entered the opponent's space, his life or death would be in the opponent's hands. But at this point, there was no way he could avoid it, because he had used all his strength for this attack, and the dimensional gate was right in front of him. Seeing Baldia's nose less than a centimeter from the dimensional gate, a sudden change occurred. Before Zhang Yi's eyes, Baldia suddenly and inexplicably disappeared. A giant wolf appeared in its place, and then it suddenly dove into dimensional space. Huh! Zhang Yi was a little surprised. But the next moment, he saw Baldia appear hundreds of meters away. Zhang Yi instantly understood what Baldia's ability was. Baldia summoned so many giant wolves, but in actuality, it did not have outstanding combat power. At the beginning, they only served as Bardia's nose and eyes, responsible for helping Bardia find prey. And now, they have taken on a second role. Either they switch positions with Bardia, or Bardia can transfer his body to any of the giant wolves at any time, and his original body becomes a giant wolf. This was why Bardia summoned hundreds of giant wolves at once, surrounding Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi's brows furrowed slightly. In that case, in order to kill Bardia, he would have to completely eliminate all the wolves around him. However, if he went up into the air and chose to attack using the Void Dark Realm, there was no guarantee that he could encompass both Bardia and the wolves within the range at the same time. After all, his speed after taking the drug was also abnormally fast, and it was entirely possible that he could dodge the range of the attack. At that time, on the contrary, Zhang Yi would fall into a period of weakness due to the excessive consumption of his supernatural powers at once. Don't worry, we have time. Time is on my side. Zhang Yi calmed himself down. Flower continued to attack the wolves, and the giant wolves were no match for Flower, and were soon slaughtered. However, the wolves were also extremely cunning. They were the supernatural beasts that embodied Baldia, and instead of engaging in a battle with Flower, they were doing their best to avoid its attacks. They were only trying to buy Baldia some time, so that he could kill Zhang Yi as soon as possible. Bardia did not give Zhang Yi the chance to think about his tactics, and once again drew his bow and knocked an arrow, sending 3 more arrows flying towards Zhang Yi. At this point, Zhang Yi had no choice but to open the Two Realms junction and defend himself in every way possible. However, this also meant that he would become a sitting duck and would no longer be able to use Space Shuffle to move around. Bardia's eyes were bloodshot, and at this point, his combat power had reached the level of Epsilon. He knew that time was running out, so he pulled the bowstring with all his strength, and arrows rained down on Zhang Yi from all directions. Once the number of arrows reached a certain limit, dimensional space would collapse due to being unable to contain the excess energy. In the Columbia Navy Command Center, Horn looked at the scene in front of him and couldn't help but sigh, what a strong defense. Even Euler had to use Compound X to suppress him. Clutie said with a serious expression, but now, he must die. Compound X had a more powerful effect than Compound 5, but it also had more terrible aftereffects. The price Bardia paid was the loss of his life expectancy and injuries that would be difficult to heal for the rest of his life. However, he believed that it was all worth it, because Chaos was worthy of it. As a soldier, being able to survive the harsh battlefield was already the greatest luck. A few years less lived is always easier to accept than death, disability, or suffering from terrible post-war syndrome. In the middle of the battlefield, Zhang Yi was inside the spherical protective circle of the Two Realms junction and frowned slightly. Under such an attack, there was no way he could dodge. Streaks of crimson light expanded within his dimensional space like lightning, and the powerful force was like a progress bar accumulating. Once the progress bar was full, his dimensional space would completely collapse. Euler, armed with a compound bow, had a smile on his lips as he caught a glimpse of his big game. At the moment, he believed that the battle was already decided, and Zhang Yi would definitely lose unless he also used drugs to enhance his strength. However, if Zhang Yi used drugs, well, that would be even better. Because at the moment, Zhang Yi, in order to ambush the mutants from the Allied forces, was in a position on Allied forces territory. Even if they both become disabled, any mutant army that comes at this time can finish the job. But at this moment, Bardia suddenly saw a slight smile lift the corner of Zhang Yi's mouth. It was as if he was mocking, but deliberately holding back. Is that all you've got? If that's all you've got to kill me, you don't stand a chance. 12-fold, world in the mirror. As Zhang Yi's voice fell, 10 huge dimensional gates suddenly appeared in midair in the area centered on him. His body also disappeared within the range of the Two Realms junction in an instant. Now the number of dimensional gates he could open was no longer 2, but 12. Everyone was improving, and Zhang Yi was no exception. Chapter 979, The Fall of the Stars. Zhang Yi suddenly disappeared in midair, only to instantly emerge from another direction. The direction he was in was right behind Bardia. His right eye's vision distorted, and his divine power once again activated. Within medium and long distances, this was Zhang Yi's strongest killing move. However, at the moment the attack was about to hit Bardia, he once again switched positions with a giant wolf, allowing the giant wolf to be crushed in his place. Zhang Yi gave a faint smile, you really have a lot of eyes. The wolves around him were all Bardia's ears and eyes. Although Zhang Yi had sneaked up from behind, he was clearly visible to Bardia. However, at this moment, the number of giant wolves was decreasing at a rate that could be seen with the naked eye. Hundreds of giant wolves were being preyed upon by Flower one by one. Within 5 minutes at most, all of these giant wolves would disappear. And Bardia would also fall into the siege of Zhang Yi and Flower. Bardia's gaze was cold as he drew his bow and shot at Zhang Yi. This time, Zhang Yi calmly opened Two Realms Junction and then used Space Shuffle at the same time. The increase in doors allowed him to use Space Shuffle without having to deliberately lift the barrier first. Doing so before was just a ruse to lure the enemy in. He just took a half step back and disappeared in midair. The next moment, he popped up again from another space. Bardia could shift his position using the giant wolf, and Zhang Yi could do the same using the 12-dimensional gates. However, his dimensional gates were intangible and formless, and could not be detected by the naked eye. In a short period of time, Bardia could not tell how many dimensional gates were around him. This also caused great trouble for his high-speed movement. Zhang Yi took out 2 holy silver grenades and threw them directly at Bardia. His body darted back and forth in midair. It was clear that he hadn't moved at all, but his shadow was everywhere. It was like a dream, or like the surroundings were covered in mirrors, making it impossible to tell whether those were Zhang Yi's true form or a reflection. Bardia's eyes were wide open. He knew that these 2 grenades must be very powerful and would pose a threat to him. However, the existence of the dimensional gate caused him to be afraid to move easily. Within this brief moment, his mind raced, and soon he observed the problem with the world in the mirror. Snow was falling from the sky, which had become the norm after the end of the world. But with careful observation, one could see that all the snow did not fall to the ground, but instead disappeared silently in midair. Bardia instantly understood that with careful observation, one could grasp the location of the dimensional gates around them. The moment the holy silver grenade fell, his feet moved, and he fled from the explosion area like a phantom. A roar sounded, accompanied by a silver light. The explosion covered an area of hundreds of meters. Bardia was not hit, but instead, after discovering the weakness in Zhang Yi's ability, he charged at him with a dagger in his hand. Smart. Zhang Yi also realized that Bardia had sensed the location of the dimensional gate. However, I never said the location of the dimensional gates was fixed. He opened his right hand, and with just a thought, the 12 dimensional gates instantly disappeared, then reappeared in different locations. Bardia almost charged headlong into one of the gates, and was forced to once again sacrifice a giant wolf to make the displacement. He held a huge compound bow in one hand and a dagger in the other, and a serious look appeared in his bloodshot eyes. Even after injecting Compound X, he still did not kill Chaos as quickly as he had imagined. Could it be that the opponent's strength was far superior to his? The command center of the Colombian Navy watched as the battle began to turn against Bardia. Horn and the others also began to worry. Euler, calm down. He is just more powerful defensively. But even the most powerful defenses have their weaknesses. At that moment, a slightly mocking voice came from outside the meeting room door. You let that guy Baldea go hunting for the space kids, didn't you? What a stupid decision. I can't believe that I was just gone, relaxing with a pretty blonde, and you got into this kind of trouble. Anyone who dared to speak to Horn in this tone was, needless to say, Lord of the Ocean John Cardalus. Horn frowned and turned his head to look at Cardalus, who was walking over with a blue cloak and a look of uncomfortable on his face. He wasn't wearing his trademark hood, revealing his flaxen hair and slightly frivolous face. Cardalus, what do you mean by this? Horn inquired. Cardalus shrugged. I had contact with that guy before, although I only used a little bit of my strength to capture him alive. He made a gesture of a little bit, really only a little bit. But that guy, he actually blocked one of my attacks. This has to be considered a miracle. Cardalus's words caused the expressions of everyone present to change involuntarily. Cardalus was a mutant with an ability index of 18,000 points. Even though he was not a good one-on-one fighter, a casual blow from him was not something a Delta class could withstand. If even his attack could not pierce Chaos's defenses, let alone the fake Epsilon, Bardia, at this time. Of course, Bardia was in no way comparable to the real Epsilon. If he were to describe his power level, he could only be said to have touched the boundaries of Epsilon, but was above the Delta level. And this power would also quickly fade away with time. But the worst thing was that the conversation between the two was still in progress when Cardalus entered. Therefore, Bardia also heard what Cardalus said. His heart sank a little more. Zhang Yi obviously had no intention of fighting him to the death, but was just flying a kite near him. Once the effects of the drug in his body wore off, he wouldn't even be able to defeat an ordinary Delta-class mutant. Then, he was a dead man. A sense of unease began to grow in Bardia's heart. However, Zhang Yi was not in the least bit flustered, nor did he have any intention of ending the battle in a hurry. The drug-addled Bardia's combat effectiveness had increased too much, and there was no need to fight him head-on. He was in no hurry, but Bardia was. Bardia clenched his teeth and thought to himself, since we've come this far, I can't win against this wretched guy without a death wish. He began to force his supernatural powers to activate at all costs. More violent red energy exploded from his body. He tugged on the compound bow in his hands, and the violent energy almost broke the compound bow made of adamantium. Stars falling. Fall like a comet. A surging power exploded from the bowstring. The furious red arrows directly rushed towards the sky, their number dense and numbering in the thousands. They soared high into the sky, and then fell at high speed towards the earth below, covering an area of nearly 1,000 meters. Chapter 980, The Man in the Mirror. This was Bald's desperate attack. He had to gamble on the fact that Zhang Yi would not dare to use dimensional space to collect such a large number of arrows. Even if he had multiple dimensional gates, it would be impossible to avoid such a concentrated attack of arrows. Not to mention that these arrows could track people, so sealing them with a dimensional gate for a short period of time would be pointless. With 12 dimensional gates, how many arrows could he seal? However, once he lost the dimensional gate, his defenses would be greatly reduced, and there was no way he could avoid Baldia's desperate attack. Even Zhang Yi's gaze had become grave at this moment. In the temporary command center of the Columbia Navy, the hearts of everyone present were in their throats. They all knew that Baldia was fighting for his life, and whether he could successfully kill Zhang Yi, or at least save Baldia's own life, depended on this strike. Zhang Yi's gaze became ice-cold, and a chilling murderous intent welled up from within his eyes. After Bardia performed this move, his breath quickly grew weak. However, there was no way he could block this move head-on, and even using dimensional space to absorb it was not the best approach. So he took a half-step back and entered dimensional space. Thousands of arrows rained down from the sky, and their killing range extended for thousands of meters in all directions. If Zhang Yi appeared from anywhere, he would be hunted down immediately. Therefore, Bardia was in no hurry at all. He had plenty of patience. However, this time, Zhang Yi's disappearance was real. After the endless rain of arrows had fallen, they suddenly stopped in midair, without any further movement. It was because they could no longer find Zhang Yi's presence. Bardia's eyes were filled with disbelief. How could this be? This guy, has he already escaped? According to previous conventions, after Zhang Yi disappeared through a dimensional gate, he would immediately come out through another door. What was the situation this time? Just as he was puzzled, a long, black stream of light appeared in the space behind him, as if it were a scar that had suddenly appeared in space. Void slash. A surging force of emptiness erupted violently behind Baldia. Baldia had used Fall of the Stars and was distracted by Zhang Yi's sudden disappearance. Facing an attack that suddenly erupted just 1 centimeter behind him, he did not have time to react. His combat suit was easily torn from the back, and his body sustained unimaginable damage. Exchange. Bardia gritted his teeth in pain and quickly used his skill to switch places with a giant wolf. The giant wolf was cut into a speck by the sword, but Bardia was not doing well. He fled hundreds of meters away, and at this time, a huge and hideous wound appeared on his back, bleeding profusely, and even the spine on his back was clearly visible. The bone-chilling cold wind wrapped around the poisonous miasma and eroded his body. He had to quickly ask the intelligence system to inject him with stimulants and antidotes to restore his strength. Fortunately, the combat suit was not damaged too badly and had self-repairing capabilities. Temporary repair materials popped out of the combat suit to temporarily plug the gap, preventing Baldia from freezing to death. But the damage Zhang Yi had given him was really too harsh. The moment Zhang Yi appeared, thousands of arrows attacked him. However, Zhang Yi's appearance was not his true form, but just an arm with a sword sticking out of midair. The moment the arrows rushed towards him, he disappeared again in midair. The different dimension was tens of thousands of times slower than the outside world, but surprisingly, the human mind was not restricted by it. In other words, for someone who had only been in it for a minute, it was like being outside for a year. And one must also endure the agony of being in a near-static state where one's thoughts move faster than one's body's reactions. In the past, Zhang Yi always used this trick to deal with his enemies. However, later, he further developed this ability, which instead became a self-sealing defensive technique. Because he discovered that as long as he himself enters dimensional space and closes the dimensional gate, then no enemy can find the entrance to the other world, let alone attack him. All he had to do was adapt to the loneliness and sense of stagnation that made real time pass by so slowly inside. This was not an invincible technique. Anyone who stayed inside for too long would eventually crack. The limit Zhang Yi had tried was 1 minute, which was roughly equivalent to 1 year outside, and could only be achieved under special circumstances. After trying it, his mental state would also be adversely affected. However, this ability only needs to be used once in battle to have an unpredictable effect on the enemy. A duel between masters can be decided in the blink of an eye. Zhang Yi dives into dimensional space, and next to him, an alarm clock is suspended, set to 1 minute. The second hand moves so slowly that it is almost invisible. But Zhang Yi was in no hurry. He had a long time to relax. Although this sense of delay was very painful, once he got used to it, it could also become a kind of enjoyment. Because he could use this long time to think, to carefully consider tactics against his enemy. Outside, Baldia's heart was about to freeze. He couldn't figure out what other strange abilities Zhang Yi had. But the stab in the back was like adding insult to injury for him at this time. He stuck his longbow into the ground and replaced it with a dagger to prevent Zhang Yi from launching another surprise attack. A few seconds later, the familiar attack appeared again. This time, it was above his head. The black long sword was wrapped in the power of emptiness and slashed down at his head from a high position. Bardia's scalp split open and blood poured out. But as a top-notch hunter, he still had the reaction speed to slash back with a reverse slash. The clash of the dagger and the horizontal sword made a deafening sound, and the energies of black and blood collided and dissipated in the air. But this time, Baldia was forced to kneel on the ground. Zhang Yi's mouth revealed a smile. Forcing yourself to overdraw your potential seems to have more side effects than expected. After saying this, he once again submerged himself into dimensional space. He glanced at the alarm clock. According to the time, he still had one last chance to launch an attack. Otherwise, he would fall into a time disorder. In fact, he was already a little confused. It was equivalent to staying in one place for a few months and then suddenly having to fight someone. But before he returned, he gave an order to Flower, attack Baldia. During the time he had fought Baldia, he had suppressed Baldia so tightly that he had not even been given any breathing space. And Flower had finally finished harvesting the wolves. At this time, Baldia was already very weak. Then, it was time for Zhang Yi's substitute to take the field.